Welcome to Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective podcast, where we meet experts from all walks of life to learn their intrinsic motivation so that they can share it with the world. What do we have in store today? Stay tuned.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody out there in podcast land. You are in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza.
And I'm David.
And today we are in for a treat. We're going to go into the spiritual dating world. We're going to talk to an author who has a wonderful story to tell, a lot of laughs. I'm sure people will laugh and say, oh, that's me, or, oh, I'm glad I didn't go through that. No matter what side you're on, I am sure you're going to really appreciate this next hour. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome the author of I Should Have Left When. So if that isn't a quick indicator, then put your seatbelts on for Mimi Mansfield. Welcome to the podcast, Mimi.
Thank you so much, Hamza. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Yes, glad you could make it. And I love the title of your book. It's called I Should Have Left When. And inquiring minds want to know that was that an indicator of I should have left when I found out the guy I was dating was not an Eagles fan?
That actually is one of my things. I could not date a Cowboys fan. That is actually something on my list.
I love it because it's really funny in the dating world or in the marriage world, right? Or let's just say the dating world. People will let things slide like deal breakers, right? And it doesn't sound like a deal breaker, but if you meet somebody, let's say in the spring, and you're a big NFL fan, and then you want to spend time to watch the games, they're like, I don't even watch football, right? So you're married resenting the person because they're doing something they love, and they're left, right?
That's right. That's actually number 8 on my dating turn-on list. Enjoy the same types of activities you do: adventure, sports, social activities, outdoor activities. So, yeah, that's actually on my list of things that work for me. Some people like the opposite. I prefer someone who's a little bit more aligned with me.
Absolutely. And we'll go into that, but on that same stretch. So, today, fly, Eagles, fly. But yesterday I was totally go Gators, and they came from behind to win. Yeah. So it's definitely Gators College and Eagles Pro.
That's all Mimi all day.
So you said you had a list of 8. We're going to go into that because I'm sure after guys hear this story, they're like, oh, I got a match. I got to have this check mark so I can make the list, right? But I would think you didn't start with the list today. So let's kind of go back in time a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what was the impetus for writing the book.
Sure. So, yes, as Hamza mentioned, my name is Mimi Mansfield. The book, of course, I Should Have Left When. The reason why I wrote the book was because I am now currently 41, and I wrote the book to really summarize my relationships over the last 20 or so years. I have never been married. By choice, and I also do not have children also by choice, which makes me a little bit different, but I can't say that I probably would have ended up in a long-term relationship if something had panned out that way. It just didn't work out that way for me, and I'm perfectly fine with that. So I really wanted to empower single women because I know there's a lot of women out here who, struggle with being single, and I wanted to, help to provide some tools on ways that I've found to be successfully, happily single. And then also my other motivation was providing pure entertainment for people in general, men, women, married, single, gay, straight. I've had so many different people that have enjoyed my book. It was just self-published by me, available on Amazon in July. But just over the last couple of months, I've had so many people of different walks of life who have enjoyed reading it. And that's really was equally my motivation, was just to be able to give some people the next generation of Waiting to Exhale, Sex and the City. It's been 20-plus years since both of those books. I felt like there was a need for something else to speak to that same audience.
Yeah, when you say that people on all walks of life had come up to you, I think that makes sense in that relationships are universal no matter the paradigm that you're in. It's, do you trust your intuition? Are they the person they say they are when they met you versus 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the line? What do you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely think that, you have to, relationships are ever evolving. We're all changing as we grow, and I definitely am not the same person at 41 that I was at 21. And I know if I had, married the person that I dated back in my early 20s, I probably would not be still with them by now. Something probably would have gone awry for sure. So I think that you evolve, and it's best to select partners that, can grow with you.
Absolutely. And I remember just a little thing about me is that I have a twin sister, so I kind of get to cheat because I have the cliff notes, from her, and we have our own little private book, like page 80, if a girl says this, right? I'm joking. But what I was kind of joking, or the truth about it is women mature a lot faster than guys, just from birth. Right, and so we all mature at different speeds or different levels depending on our life path or what we're going through, and it might not necessarily mean that person's an evil or an opposite to you. It's just that you had that life experience, and then it's time to move on. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, recency and lifetime. I mean, I think that. And I write about this in my book, that each relationship had a purpose in my life. And, I don't think it was not all a waste just because it didn't end in happily ever after. So I think that, I can point to, as an example, I write about this, one particular relationship that I was in early on, and this is something I mentioned. It's not a whole story in this particular book, but my goal is to go back and write about prior relationships. But I do talk about a guy that I dated that I call, I'm trying to. So one guy that I dated I call bad credit score guy, and and so actually. It was not a good relationship. It did not end well. But through him, I met one of my closest friends. You mentioned your sister, Swada, and through her, I met a ton of people that are my connections in the Orlando area where I live. And if it weren't for having dated that credit score guy, again, there was a reason he was in my life. 2.5 years. And, again, the positives that I got out of that were the friendships and relationships that I still hold to this day, 15 years, or almost 15 years after we first met. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you have we're going to get into your list, but it made me think that maybe when you met that person, there was a checklist there wasn't something on the checklist. So you're like, from now on, I better ask this question. Is that what happened with this person?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually started a checklist in my early 20s when I was going out on dates, and that was actually, I should mention that, when I first decided to write this book, I was in my early 20s, so it's taken me a long time to finally get to it, but the initial desire came in my early 20s. I would go out on dates, and people would often say, oh, how was your date, or, what exactly are you looking for? So back then, I started writing stories, about my dates. So it was, pre-social media, early 2000s. And so I would go out on dates, write out the whole story in Microsoft Word and email it to my friends. And they loved it. And so I thought, wow, at one point someone said, you should write a book. And I'm like, oh, maybe I should. It was never my thing. I actually was not a big reader. And I'm just starting to pick up reading more after finishing my book. Joined a book club or what have you. But in my early 20s, I would write stories and send them out to my friends. And I also wrote a list of what I was looking for in a guy. So, of course, that evolves over time. And so when I met that credit score guy, as an example, he did not check a lot of the boxes on my list. I'll give one example was I wanted someone with a college education because that's what I have. And but I tried to bend because that credit score guy did not have a college education. And I thought, well, let me not ding him for that. Situations and circumstances happen. Let me try to be open-minded and, give him the benefit of the doubt. And after that relationship, I did add that to my list of requirements. And, something that's kind of somewhat controversial, because I have, friends who did not finish college, and they're obviously amazing, intelligent people, great, hardworking people. It's not an indicator of, the person's going to be good, because you obviously have a lot of college degree people who are not good people. But that was something that I decided to add to my list. I felt as though what threw me off in that situation was there was a level of maybe insecurity on his part because he hadn't completed that, so that he always kind of held a little bit of resentment against me. And I felt that the playing field was a little bit uneven because of that. So it wasn't so much, the degree itself, but I think what it stood for and how it made him view me maybe a little bit in a more on a pedestal compared to him. So those are the types of, relationship fundamentals that, we're in our 20s, we kind of look past things. But I've tried to now at this stage in my life really write about, things that we shouldn't turn a blind eye to, and things that we should really focus on for more positive and productive partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting, because as you were sharing that story, and thanks for sharing that, it made me think of undergrad, where I went to a HBCU, and at the HBCU, the numbers were just, for people listening, it's ridiculous, right? So as a guy, I loved it. It was like 30-1. But when you're talking about women wanting these lists, and you have people coming up to you, it'd be interesting when you speak to younger women that are maybe in their early 20s, because they're in that environment, if not worse, where guys aren't going to school. So would they, it's interesting, because at that age of 20, you don't know how that person's going to turn out at 30, 40, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I was just, I was just wondering what you say when young people come up to you, because I'm sure you probably were thinking you're writing it for your contemporaries, but, this freshman in college comes up to you like, I should have left when, I love your book. What do you say to them?
Yeah, honestly, if I could help young women navigate the dating waters better than I did, I would be thrilled, because that's something that would really make me feel fulfilled, that someone might have decided, hey, maybe this isn't a healthy situation. Maybe, the fact that this guy texts me a picture of, his private parts very early on is probably not a good idea. Maybe this guy asked me to come to his apartment, on the second date. Maybe I shouldn't go. If I can help someone avoid, being in a bad situation, especially my younger ladies, that's a huge passion of mine. My friends and I, we have a charity for young women, and, it's definitely something that whatever we can do to help, and especially women of color. Unfortunately, like you mentioned, our dating options might be a little bit slimmer if you're looking for a man of color with an education. It's sad to say, but it is the reality, just statistically speaking. But yes, I would love to help my young women make better decisions, and better even than I did at that time.
Sure. Thanks for that. And I'm also thinking, when you said you start dating in your 20s, or some people their late teens, let's go back a little further than that, because or in my experience, when I speak with my married friends or business colleagues and what have you, they jokingly laugh, but the guys will ultimately say, I married someone like my mom, even though I didn't try to. And women marry someone like their father, so it goes to their formative years, for 40 and for 7 years. And I just wanted to know, what was your childhood like? Were both of your parents around? And do you use some of that experience to determine whom you're going to date?
Yes, a wonderful question. I think, like you said, most of us are influenced by our upbringing, our environment. I think there's, obviously an element of nature and nurture in all the decisions that we make. And so from a nurture standpoint, I had the best parents on the planet. So my parents I affectionately call them my kids because now they're in their 70s, and sometimes I feel like they're my own children that I didn't have. But they are absolutely amazing. They are party parents, I like to call them. I could still take them out to the lounge with me. They'll dance. They love to hang out with my friends and me. And that was kind of the way it was growing up. They had, their friends over. Friday nights were always, party nights in the basement. Parents had their friends playing cards and, having drinks, listening to music. And, I grew up with the late 70s, early 80s, R&B, soul music that I just love. I know Hamza loves as well. He's my musical soulmate. And so, it was a very a Cosby Show-like upbringing in a way, except that we didn't have the money. And I should have mentioned my parents did not go to college, so that's another reason why I'm very sensitive to trying to be open-minded to people who did not complete college educations, because my parents are the most brilliant people on the planet. But yeah, so we were very modest upbringing, very working class. My father worked for the Philadelphia Electric Company. I'm born and raised in Philadelphia. I should have mentioned that. I know you mentioned the Eagles, but I didn't actually say. Born and raised in Philadelphia, and spent all my schooling years there up through college. But my father worked for the electric company, so blue collar, worked in like a maintenance role actually, and then my mom worked in a clerical role with a nursing company. And so, it just never, poor or anything like that. Thankfully, it wasn't like lights out or, utilities not paid, that sort of thing. They were always very responsible, just very hardworking, great people. And then in terms of their relationship and the influence that had on me, they're very different. And so what I saw was I actually have tried to go in a little bit of an opposite direction of my parents. I feel like they've made it work, and I do write about this. I dedicated my book to my parents. They're almost 50 years married, which is amazing. But I don't feel like my mom and I are very similar personality-wise. We're very life of the party, kind of extreme extroverts. Love going out and go out all the time. Love to travel. Love adventure. And very talkative, expressive. My dad on the other end is more introverted, likes to stay in. He could watch ID channel all day. Doesn't like to talk on the phone. Just really values his alone time and space. So I don't feel like I vibe well with. I should say, wonderful traits of a father. Because he's not going to be out at the bars down the street. He's going to be home every night. We had dinner around the table growing up, myself and my older brother. I should mention my older brother, Derek, who lives in Atlanta and grew up with me in Philadelphia. He's 6 years older than me. So we had a great upbringing, very wholesome. Again, meals around the table every day. I was a Girl Scout and ballet classes and, band and all of those good things, wholesome things. But as far as my parents' relationship, I don't think it would work for me. And I write about this actually more in the About Me section of my book. And so I've tried to now really focus on, meeting people that are closer in personality type with me. And some of the guys in the book that I write about, or been like a little more introverted, or just having different fundamentals than I have, and that I feel like won't make for me to have a successful long-term relationship. I don't really want to have the elements of compromise, extreme compromise that I saw my parents had to make. So yeah, my parents are a big influence on my decisions, and honestly, it's going to sound bad, but because I saw how hard it was. It kind of helped me decide that I didn't really want to get married. I didn't necessarily think that I could, again, make those compromises, those difficult decisions every day. Didn't really feel like I wanted to. I really just loved my autonomy and my flexibility when I'm free and single. So we'll see what happens, but yes, that was my parents' relationship did play a big role, and I think for everybody it does. But it did play a role in the decisions I've made so far, probably towards staying single. But then again, in selecting a partner, I do feel like I'm going to pick someone probably not quite like my father, as wonderful as he was. I prefer someone who is a little bit more social and outgoing like myself.
No, if I think David wants to jump at the bit. Go ahead, David, jump in.
No, I was going to ask you, mainly, so your parents being married like 50 years, that's kind of the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so do you, and you just in your experience for 41 years, do you have any thoughts, when you're doing stuff, and you're going to start
I think.
Yeah, David's breaking up like you're sitting on the speaker or something, bro. Step away from the mic.
How about that?
Better.
There you go.
Better? Okay. So being married that long, so I just want to have, if you have any thoughts on it, just from your own experiences, when do you think a person is more prepared to go the long haul with someone in their 20s and their 30s? I mean, me personally, I think people should wait until either the late 20s or 30s before they really settle down and kind of develop into, a person and figure out who they are before they settle down for the long term.
I 100% agree with that. I think the tough part is for women, from an anatomy standpoint, you're, kind of biologically conditioned to try to find that mate probably before age 35, 6, 37. And that's puts a lot of pressure on young women because, who's to say you're going to, bump shopping carts at Whole Foods, but you're Mr. Right by that time. I mean, maybe you don't meet him until you're 47. I mean, and so it's hard, for women, I think, to kind of balance waiting for the right person and then trying to make sure you don't wait too long if your, biological clock is telling you otherwise. Thankfully for me, I never had a desire to have children. It's a strange thing. I love children. We have a charity for children. I just, for whatever reason, didn't have a innate desire to have any of my own. So it was easy for me. But, yeah, so if I had my choice, I definitely would postpone waiting to get married forever because that sounds so bad. But I probably get a little bit of the cynicism from my dad. I love him to death, but he's very cynical. And so even on my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, I did a dinner for them, and someone said, asked my dad kind of what you're asking about. Oh, how did you do it? And he's like, well, it would have been a lot easier if you could, take a break every 10 years or something like that, something to that extent, because, it is really hard to be with one person forever. I think, no matter, love, kind of is a fleeting kind of feeling. It's not just 100% you feel, in love every day, all day. I know my father and my mom, what they really value is family and, making sure that they were staying together as a unit for the family, quite frankly. I know that was their main motivation. And because they're both really good people and, to my knowledge, there was no infidelity or any, deal breakers that occurred, I think that's how they were able to kind of get through maybe some of the challenging times that they might have had in their relationship. It was like, okay, well, we're still going to stick it out and make it work. But it's not for everybody. I don't think I could have made it that long. And this is very controversial, but I do say this to people when I talk about marriage. I don't know that men are biologically set up for a long-term commitment to one woman. So that's something that I've always kind of felt strongly about, even though I believe I come from a family of, again, parents who've been together forever, and to my knowledge, faithful. I just have never really felt like I wanted to, tell a man, hey, you can only be with me for the next 50 years. Sorry. I feel kind of, I don't know, confining, and I never really wanted to have a man commit to that. That sounds awful. I know that sounds absolutely crazy, but that's been my view for many years now. when I say that to men, they're usually like, yeah, girl, that's right, but they don't really say that in front of a woman. But then the other side of that is, what's the alternative? If you don't select one partner for, the better part of your life, the alternative is you're kind of maybe bouncing around, and you're non-committal. And that's not so easy either. That comes with its own share of risks. So choose your poison, or you're just completely solo, which some people can do. I'm not good at being by myself. I need to have some level of companionship. It could just be from my girlfriends. It doesn't have to be from a guy. But I know I thrive on energy from other people. So long answer to your – sorry, go ahead.
No, that's great, and it makes a lot of sense in a lot of respects. And at this point, I do want to give a shout-out to Dr. Francis Cresswell. Are you familiar with her?
I'm not. It sounds like I should be, though.
Yeah, I think, for the listeners and for yourself, that you would love – I love this woman. I mean, she's awesome. God bless the dead. She transitioned a couple of years ago at 80-something. But I remember, and that probably was a bonus for me going to an HBCU. We kind of were – used to certain things that other, when I talked to people that didn't go, they didn't get those experiences. Mm-hmm. And so when she had come and spoken, she's on a platform, and she's a psychologist for people that, just to give you a little bit more. She's a psychologist. She was at the University of Chicago. And so she kind of, as you learned, right, going to getting higher educations, I think you have an advanced degree as well. And then you bring that back to the community, right? And so, her whole main thing was you should wait until you're about 28 to 30. And you're saying this to a bunch of 19, 20, 21-year-olds, and they're like, what are you talking about? And then all these years later, it makes so much sense because of knowing yourself. And so, like even when you're talking about the book, I Should Have Left When, that denotes to me that there was a time, and just myself too, and maybe most of the people that we interview, there's a time where your intuition is with you your whole life, but you turn it off and you don't listen to it. And so there's all these signs and red flags, and we're going to get to the funny stuff, right? But a lot of it's funny because we weren't listening to the intuition. So it's that one relationship that we all wanted, and it's always there, and we take it for granted, or we did. I'll speak for myself.
Yeah, no, that's it. That's it. I do.
And when you're saying that about your parents, so here's the question. So what was really interesting, I finished undergrad in the mid-'90s, and I believe that we were the first generation that women didn't go to college for an MRS degree, right? So, right, what that meant was girls went to school because the guys are going to be a doctor, lawyer. And when we graduated, it was like, what job do you have? They were like, what job do you have?
Right.
And so there was more of a focus on career and maybe personal enrichment versus settling down to get like, why would I do that? I just got this degree and I'm moving far away from my parents and all of the above. Were you in that, could I lump you in that same boat that you were not so much didn't want to be like your parents, but you had opportunities that they may not have had?
Yeah, I do actually write about that in the About Me section. Again, in my book, I talk about how even starting back from my grandmother and the limited options that she had in selecting a mate. And then, my mom, a few more options, a little bit, broader pool. But, I mean, for me, the world is my oyster, especially because, we can date any race. I mean, I could even date a woman if I wanted to. I mean, it's just like anything you want, you can do. And I think that it is a major transition in our generation. I was born in the late 70s. So I think, anybody kind of born in the late 60s and beyond, I think we all kind of are in a period where, we came up as equals in terms of men and women. And I think that is a big difference from our parents and prior generations, like you said, where you were more the missus, you were that was the expectation. You're going to come out of school, you're going to get married and, become a secretary or a teacher or a nurse or, all great professions. But the fact now that you could do something that can put you on an even higher playing field and put you, in a place even where you might be making more than your mate. It just throws in a whole different dynamic versus, the June Cleaver's image that we kind of grew up watching, but knowing that wasn't what we wanted, at home, with the vacuum cleaner and, serving her man. It's like, well, now, the type of relationship that I would desire, partnership that I would desire if I'm going to be in one, is one where we're equal. If I'm, taking out the trash, you're vacuuming, or if I'm, washing the dishes, you're cooking, or whatever. Just that balance is what I prefer. And that's one thing that I learned as well from viewing my parents. I feel like the major challenges that they had were situations where one person depended on the other person solely for any particular role. So say, for example, it's always your job to cook. Then you might get a little bit of frustration or resentment where it's like, oh my gosh, do I always have to do that? Unless you really love doing that one thing. If that person relies on you solely for one thing, it kind of can become a point of contention. And, same thing in a traditional marriage where, the husband is the breadwinner and, the wife has to do all the chores. Or she's like, oh gosh, I really don't want to do all the chores. And, so that's kind of I think, I know that was motivation behind, Women's Lib and women wanting to be free to do whatever they want. You might want to stay home. That'd be great. I mean, some women, they love that. But you might also prefer to be in a corporate environment or start your own business, and you should have the freedom to do that. And I think the downside with that change in our culture is that it's now it's kind of undermined the traditional value of a marriage, because then in the past you had to stay married because he was your financial support. You couldn't even buy a house as a woman before. And as a man, it was kind of you needed that woman to take care of home, take care of the kids, raise the family. And so now, the current day marriage, the need isn't there as much. So that's why I think we're seeing 50% divorce rate and more, because you don't need to stay married for any other reason than that you love each other. And if the love fades, which unfortunately oftentimes it may, you don't have that that fundamental kind of tie to keep you together. So yeah, I think that our relationships are very different, than our parents' relationships. Coming up in the times that we did, I think that it's changed the dynamic because you and I are equals, and I can do everything that you can do, and that makes you view me in a different way, and that makes, again, the relationship have a different set of challenges than it might have in the past.
Yeah, and let me say I do have to address that 50% because breakup rate, because in the Wall Street Journal 2 weeks ago, they mentioned that divorce rates are declining, not in the increase like it was for so many decades. And they were asking why. They, of course, for Wall Street Journal, they wouldn't have the data. And what they were finding was that with college-educated people or couples, they did decide to get married later. So when they were in their mid-30s or something, they didn't have to scramble or have the scarcity if they had when they were younger, like you were saying. And so there was more stability. There was more stability in their job or in their business or what they were wanting to do. And so we're actually seeing that trend drop. And in the Wall Street Journal, they did, it was one article, but they were saying that's for college-educated. But I think that it may be it may be the same for those that didn't go to college if they waited also. So I'm not saying that. I have family members that got married right after college, and they're still married. So I don't want to say, hey, we're all on one page and wait until you're 90 to get married. But when you look at the data, I'm sure we could find data for each, for every argument that we have. Absolutely. So one thing I do want to ask you, because going to, like I said, at a HBCU and just in the college environment where the numbers are just so out of whack, And there was that joke that, black men's college is through the penal system, which kind of sucks, right?
Gosh.
So if it were like 30-1, then people were always saying, oh, I met the right one this week, And then the point I'm kind of getting to is Negro geography. I want to play with you a little bit on Negro geography, because when you talk about the dating pool, it becomes really small, as you were saying, based off of what you're looking at. And we didn't go over your list, but that list the list of people may be really small. So you may be in Orlando, but those people, if they're Greek or if they have same professional ties, they may have relationships or business dealings with people in Atlanta. And so you may be dating somebody and their homeboy knows them or things like that. And that's where the joke with Negro geography came about. And it was tongue-in-cheek about your blog post about life after installment, yet another married man. Because that falls right into it. And I want you to tell a little bit about that story, and then we can get into your list.
Yeah, no, for sure. So my website, shouldaveleft.com. So there I've started a blog where I talk about some of my relationship experiences outside of the book. And just to kind of keep readers engaged, I've had, a variety of readers over the last couple of months that have really seemed to enjoy reading the book. And so I want to continue to feed them content while I'm working on the next book. So one of the blog stories is about a guy who I met at a film festival in Miami, and he, kind of courted me somewhat. We talked on the phone for a little while, but then, every time he kind of asked me to meet up, it was just last minute and, hey, come to this hotel. I'm like, oh, wait, no, I'm not doing that. And so finally I ended up seeing him again at the same film festival a couple of years later after we kind of fell out, not fell out, but just kind of stopped talking, time just kind of went on. We weren't in communication much anymore. And we had a mutual friend. The mutual friend I was with knew him, went up to him and said hello, and he came back and he said, oh, yeah, that's, so-and-so and his wife. I'm like, wife? What? And he's like, oh, yeah, I've known them for years. They've been married since, the 90s or whatever. I'm like, wait a minute. So yeah, I do talk about a similar story in the book where, what will come to light, or what is done in the dark will eventually come to light, because, the guys that I have engaged with that I thought, were single men and they tried to keep their marriages on the low, eventually I'll find out one way or another. So might as well just be honest. Yeah.
Yeah. So in your experience, meaning, have you exclusively just dated black men, or you dated other races too?
Yeah, so majority have been African American, but I do mention in the book, I've had some international travels for business and for pleasure. I'm an auditor by background, and so I'm thankful I've had a career that's kind of taken me a lot of places nationally and then again internationally. So I've met, I talk about one guy I met, this was years ago, in Germany. He was of Armenian descent. I had another guy I met in, oh my goodness, Punta Cana, not Punta Cana, oh my goodness, Costa Rica, and he was Moroccan descent. So I've had, usually if they're not black, they're brown. I have not really officially dated Caucasian. When I was in my early 20s, I did date an Asian guy. It actually turned out he was married as well and didn't tell me. So, yeah. So yeah, I have had a little bit of, kind of dip my toe into kind of outside of the African American world, but because I mentioned at the top of the call, I really prefer someone who is very similar to me. It's not so much about the race; it's about the culture. Because if it was about race, I could date an African guy or I could date a Jamaican guy, but I actually don't prefer that either. I prefer someone who has a culture that's aligned with mine, similar upbringing to what I experienced. And that's not for everybody. We have a dear friend who is married to someone from Germany. and that works well for her. I just know it wouldn't necessarily work for me. So, yeah, I have traditionally dated African Americans for the most part.
Okay.
Yeah, I prefer that. Yeah, for me, it's really important. Like, that sounds crazy, but like we talked about sports or music and just the things that are like kind of all American or all African American food. I just like to share those things with a significant other if I'm going to be in that type of a partnership.
Yeah. And so right before we get to your list here, do you ever think about, well, maybe this person that I'm thinking about going out with, maybe he has a list, or any guy could have a list, and on your end that you have to, quote unquote, have your act together because maybe he's going to have a list, or are you know what, I'm not going to think about what this person's looking for. If I'm what he's looking for, well, then that's that. And if, you don't really think much about what the person's looking for, so you don't have to carry yourself in a certain way, or?
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of getting older. Again, now being 41, I think that and I think the older you get, the more you kind of, you know yourself. I know it sounds very cliche, but it is true. I am at a point in my life where, if it works, that's great. If it doesn't, that's perfectly fine. I know I'm not going to bend over backwards or change that much for someone, because again, I know I can be happily single. So that's a great thing for me, because I think if you're longing to be in a partnership or relationship with someone so badly, you might end up settling for less just because you want to be loved, because you want to be in a relationship. But if you can be really truly happily single, and you're not pursuing a relationship because you want someone to take care of you, or you want, any of those reasons that traditionally always kind of the reasons that we got into these relationships, I don't think that gives you the best result in the end. I think when you go into it as a whole person and you're happy with yourself, you're fulfilled, you've achieve the things you want to achieve in life, or you're working toward those goals, you know what they are, you're confident in that. When someone comes along, they're not going to knock you off that boat, and they're not going to move you, So to your question, I'm not as if what he's looking for aligns with me, that's great. If it doesn't, it's just not going to work. At this stage in my life, I'm very sure of who I am and what I bring to the table, and I would prefer if someone could meet me halfway, and I can tell very quickly if they can't. If and I might not be enough for that person. Maybe they want Oprah Winfrey. I don't know. I mean, they could want Gabrielle Union. I mean, whatever the case is. I mean, I'm not a queen. I have my flaws. So I definitely am open about that and have no problem, making sure that we make sense for each other, because I don't want anyone who's going to be in any way dissatisfied. I want you to be very sure that I'm the right person for you and that I'm enough for you for the long term.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you think is, we're kind of doing like the cliffhanger about getting to your list, but
no, it's fine.
No, but I want to ask you, what's the difference from dating now versus the 20s? I mean, if you sounds like you're set with your business, you have a phenomenal book, people all lives are coming to you, and women can pretty much write their own ticket. And so what's your dating life like now, since you have this foundation and women are able to do what they want? Are you dating older men, or are you dating younger men in their 20s? I mean, that could be, hey, this is just what's going on with that?
Oh, that's funny. So I have always liked older men. Even when I was in my late 20s, I was dating guys in their late 30s. I actually have I mentioned this as well in the book. When I was in my late 20s, I also had dated a guy who was 42. I used to call him 42 because it was such a big deal to me that he was 42. It seemed so old, and now I'll be 42 in a couple of months, so it's kind of ironic. But, so yeah, I've always preferred older. I don't know. No, I haven't really, really talk through exactly why that is, other than the fact that I know I'm very mature. I've always been, and I've always had older girlfriends as well. I always joke about not really knowing who's going to bury me because I don't have any kids. I don't have any nieces and nephews, and all my friends are older. So I'm like, uh-oh, what's going to happen? So yeah, I've just always preferred older, and that will stay the same. I don't even prefer people that are my own age or guys that are my own age. That just doesn't, yeah. So
guys your age need to step it up because they're still not maturing on the level as women, it sounds like.
No, I know. I don't feel it. I don't see it. I can't tell you. I don't ever remember dating anyone my own age other than like high school. After that, it's always been older. So yeah, I'm routinely 10 plus years older.
Wow.
Yeah, and I talk about that. There's a story in the book about a guy I dated with almost 20 years, which was too much, which is part of the reason why it didn't work out. But yeah.
Sure. Well, look, the second part of that question is, if you're dating older, and you mentioned the lovely story with your parents, and we're at that age where we are the sandwich generation. So some of us do have children, and then some of us had, like you said, your parents are like your kids now. And that wasn't in a derogatory state. It was more so they're getting older, so you take care of them. So what is the paradigm of dating older people and the older men in the sandwich generation that have older parents or may have children? Do you date? What's that scenario like for you?
Yeah, so I do, and I mentioned this in the book as well with a gentleman I met. His name is Luke in the book. I did change all the names of the book to protect the guilty. I should mention that. So when I met Luke, he had a child who was, I think, 12. And I said, well, as long as it's double-digit ages at this point, I'll deal with it. It used to be, like, I really prefer their, later teens, just because it sounds awful, but I prefer they're pretty much almost like 1 foot out the door, because there's a whole lot of challenges that come in. Of course, it's, trying to be a parent to someone else's kids, and because I didn't want to sign up to be a parent to begin with, then to bring it, another, your partner's ex into the situation, it's a lot, and I personally never really wanted to have that dynamic in my life if I could avoid it. But finding a guy at this stage that has never been married with no kids, other than someone I know, there's not many out there. So you do end up, once you're in your late 30s, I'd say, starting to identify guys that you're going to date that are going to have kids. And for most women, obviously, it's not an issue. I'm just the abnormal person in this sense that I prefer that the kids are older. But, life goes so quickly. I remember when I was in my early 30s, I met a guy who had kids that were like 11 and 12, and I thought, oh, gosh, they're just too young. And now those kids are already in college, so it's like, if you could just sit tight and wait through it, they grow up so quickly. It almost doesn't matter. But a 2-year-old, that's pushing it. That won't work.
Sure. Well, let me ask you about boomerangs, right? Because you were talking about when you were doing Microsoft Word and sending this to your friends. This was pre-social media, right?
Yeah.
And so you didn't have access to the wide range of people that you do now, like you travel and all this other stuff. So have you ever boomeranged where maybe Mr. 2004, you look him up and you're like, holy crap, he wasn't what I wanted back then, but now he's the bee's knees.
So, yeah, I kind of do have a story like that. It wasn't that big of a gap, but it was a 7-year gap, and that's one of the stories in the book. The guy, Torrance, that he's featured as one of the gentlemen. I call him Flight. And so if you pick up the book and read that Flight chapter, there's a little bit of a boomerang there where I met him, and then I don't know exactly what happened, but then he came back through social media 7 years later and popped up, and I thought, whatever happened with that? Let me revisit that and see what happens. And you'll have to read the book to find out.
Nice. I do want to, one thing you're talking about with I should have left when, right? You're talking about intuition, and sometimes there were signs that you should have paid attention to, and you didn't, and you're like, now you have this book, right? And so I'll tell one for mine that I thought was awesome that I'll share with the podcast. And to my twin sister, what we learned was when you bring people around for you don't really know them until the holidays. Because when they're around your family and your family's one way and then they're totally different, it's a red flag. And so we were like, oh, wow. And so now, like you were saying, list, it's always modified. And on your site, you're talking about some red flags for women and for dating women, what they should be aware of. I'd love for you to highlight some of those.
Yeah. So, no, that's a good one is, does your family like them? So that was one of the items on my list. So I think that's really important if, your parents or your family never liked them. I have a lot of those situations in my past that, should have just listened to mom, So some of those red flags I have, he has no true friends of his own. That one, there are some people who are loners, and they could be perfectly normal people. Because I'm a very social person, it's hard for me to wrap my head around someone who doesn't really have, true friends. But I feel like when I've befriended even girls who, didn't really have close friends, I usually find out pretty soon why they don't. There's usually something wrong. So I think it works both ways, men and women, or just people in general. And there's a lack of people close to them. That could be a red flag. One of the other ones I have on here, he's not available when you need him. So I've had that, those situations where, you need, you kind of, and I don't like to need people. I like to do everything myself as much as possible. But if you, especially if you tell me you're going to be there and you're going to come through and then you don't show up, that is just like a huge red flag and just makes the intuition alarm go off. It just makes your stomach turn when, you can't really rely on the person who's supposed to be your significant other. Looking at the list here, the Mr. Too Good to Be True guy, everything is just perfect. So, I've had the guy who's like, oh, you won't have to work, and, we can get married in Fiji, and, we'll have baby facing at our wedding, and just painting these, like, extreme pictures that, looking back, it's like, oh, gosh, he had to be a liar. But, when you're in the moment, you just kind of think, like, oh, well, why would he lie to me? Why would he, and yeah. So that's on the list of red flags. Let's see. Oh, the guy who tells you that he loves you within the first week. So I've had that, kind of just like saying it too soon. It's like, okay, you're out for something, and it's even if you feel like you're even getting close to, falling for somebody, you just keep your mouth shut. You just don't know, especially within a week. It's just way too soon. And one last one I have is he asks you for thousands of dollars. Yeah, that's a huge red flag. And even if it's for an investment, at the time, I was like, oh, I'm just being supportive. And my friends were like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, what could go wrong? Yeah.
So I guess within the first week, if he's asking, for money or telling you that he loves you, you should not walk away but run.
Run. It's I don't know what's brighter than red, but whatever that color is, it's a huge flag. Yeah.
So Mimi, have you ever thought about writing a book for men and giving us some tips?
I've had a lot of men so far that have read my book and really love it because they get the perspective of a woman. I guess it's almost like women reading Steve Harvey's, books for, how to think like a man. I think that my book, when men read it, I literally had a man who I met recently at the Tom Joyner family reunion, and he read my book really quickly right after and emailed me, and he said, wow, it really gave me insight into the way that some women think, and he really, really enjoyed it. So I do feel like it lends itself to men as it is today. So, yeah.
Yeah, if you did it as a pseudonym, no one would ever know.
Oh, you mean change my
writing
name?
for a man? Yeah.
Yeah.
His name is Homie Homerson, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, people are surprised at how many, when you go on Amazon and just do, like, searches for, like, dating advice books and things like that, it's overwhelmingly written by men for women, and it's crazy to me because it's like, listen, ladies, we can do this ourselves, and that's part of my foundation and what my platform is, really being able to dig deep and do your own work to look back on what you've done wrong and make better decisions going forward. So I really think we have the answers. Yeah, we really have the answers inside, and we just need to, kind of tap into that gift.
I have one last question, and we are at the top of the hour because you have you're talking about Credit Score Guy, and then you have Radio Shack Guy. And was this guy out of date because Radio Shack doesn't exist? So did he wear bell bottoms and butterfly collars?
What's funny about that? I was in Jamaica last weekend and saw a Radio Shack, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's where they went." So they are still around. But
there's a few around. There's one in New Mexico when I was living there. There's one, at least a couple over there. Yeah.
Who knew? So but I mentioned that because I talk about going back for my next book and writing about guys from my early 20s, and Radio Shack was my early 20s. So yes, Radio Shack was still around back in the early 2000s, and that's where he worked. And he was just not a good. That was not a good ending to that story either. But that's for another chapter.
Sure. So there's going to be a Blockbuster guy too.
Yeah. That's funny. I actually did date a guy that worked at a video store, a small one in Chestnut Hill, outside where I grew up in Philly. That's funny.
That's funny. Blockbuster Tower Records guy.
Oh my gosh. I do have a story at Tower Records too. That's pretty funny.
Oh, wow.
Mike, let's keep it going. MySpace Mike.
Oh God.
Yeah, MySpace Mike.
I did meet a guy when I was 20 years old on Black Planet, I think it was. And I flew down to Atlanta to meet him. That's how crazy I am. But we're actually still friends to this day. He's a great guy. He lives in Atlanta, married and everything. So that one worked. That was a good internet dating story. Got bad ones.
Nice. Yeah, and shout out, for real, and shout out to the Beehive because Beyonce's sister bought Black Planet recently. So they're keeping it going. Wow. Yeah, she bought it in 2019, so I guess they're going to revive it, apparently.
For her, yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. And I think, the hour just flew by, and I have so many other questions, and maybe we should have you back on. But before we do, thank you. It was a joy, Mimi. But please let us know your site, where we can pick up the book, and your social media so people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, so you can find the book on Amazon. It's a hard copy and ebook on Amazon if you just put in Mimi Mansfield, MIMIMANSFIELD. Or you can go to my website, shouldhaveleft.com. There is a link there to get to my Instagram, to my Twitter, and to the Amazon page to purchase. And there's also, of course, on my website more information about me. And then my Instagram is at Mimi Mansfield 8. And my Twitter is at Mimi Mansfield. So plenty of ways to get in touch with me. Would love to stay connected. So feel free to reach out anytime.
Awesome. Well, you've just been in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza.
And I'm David.
Fly, Eagles, fly. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully I live in Atlanta, but this is the one time I don't wave the flag for the Falcons. It's all Eagles today.
That's it. I live in Orlando, same thing.
Yes. Well, it was a pleasure, Mimi. Let's definitely stay in touch.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Hamza. Thank you, David.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks again for checking out another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective podcast. Please check us out on our website at intrinsicmotivation.life, where you can click on the Speak Pipe button and leave any suggestions for future podcasts that you'd like us to cover. Also, check us out on our social media sites. We have a YouTube channel, Facebook page, iTunes podcast, in addition to Stitcher and Google Play, all under Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. Check you out next time. Have a great day.